Ethan, a young human soldier, had never imagined he would find himself in this situation. He had been sent to the planet of Zorath to carry out a routine mission, one that involved gathering intelligence on the warlord, Garen.
What?
When he received a distress call about the kidnapping of Princess Lyra, everything changed. The princess, the only daughter of King Rhaegar, had been captured by Garen and held in his fortress. The situation was dire, and the king's soldiers were no match. For Garen's army, Ethan was chosen for this mission not because of his rank or experience, but because of his unique skills. He had grown up in the dangerous cities of Earth, learning how to survive and adapt in ways that made him an excellent soldier. But this mission was different. It wasn't just saving any person. It was saving a princess, a leader of another world. It was a responsibility he hadn't taken lightly. The journey to Zorath had been long, but Ethan's mind was focused on one goal: rescue the princess. He knew the risks, the traps, and the dangers, but he had no other choice. Had to succeed. As he arrived on the planet, he moved quickly through the dense jungle surrounding the fortress. The air was thick with humidity, and the sound of strange creatures echoed through the trees. But Ethan had trained for this. He was used to strange and unfamiliar environments. He sneaked through the shadows, his military training helping him stay unnoticed. Every step had to be calculated. Garen's fortress was heavily guarded, but Ethan had studied the layout from the intel he had gathered. He knew where the weak points were and how to get past them. With his heart pounding in his chest, he moved forward, closer to the princess. The fortress was built like a fortress of steel and stone. Towering over the landscape with its sharp edges, it was surrounded by a high wall, making it nearly impossible for anyone to get in without being seen. But Ethan had come prepared. He used a small grappling hook to climb over the wall and land softly on the other side. The guards on the perimeter had no idea he was there. As he made his way deeper into the fortress, he avoided guards, slipped through hidden passages, and finally reached the inner chambers. It was there that he found her Princess Lyra. She was locked in a small, dimly lit room, sitting on a chair, her hands bound. She was beautiful, with golden hair that shimmered in the light and eyes that held a sense of calm despite her situation. Ethan could see the worry on her face, but she didn't seem afraid. She was strong, just like the rumors had said. Ethan didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, cutting through the ropes that bound her hands with a small knife. Her eyes widened in surprise as she looked up at him, but she didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. The relief on her face said it all. She had been waiting for someone to save her, and here he was. "Are you here to rescue me?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. Ethan nodded. "I've been sent to get you out of here, Princess. We don't have much time. Garen's forces will be looking for us soon." Lyra stood up slowly, her legs stiff from sitting for so long. She moved with grace despite the weariness in her eyes. Ethan quickly checked the hallway. It was empty for now, but they couldn't stay long. He grabbed her arm gently and pulled her toward the exit. As they moved, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Ethan's training kicked in, grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her into a nearby alcove just as two guards rounded the corner. They were so close Ethan could hear their breaths. They held still, barely daring to breathe. Lyra looked up at Ethan with wide eyes, her heart racing, but she trusted him. The guards passed by without noticing them, and Ethan gave a silent sigh of relief. They were getting closer to the exit. But just as they neared the door, a loud alarm blared, filling the air with a shrill, constant noise. The guards had realized something was wrong. The fortress was about to be locked down. They were trapped. Ethan's mind raced. He had to think fast. He turned to Lyra. "Stay close. We're almost out, but we need to hurry." They ran through the halls, but it wasn't long before they were spotted. A group of guards turned the corner, blocking their escape. Without thinking, Ethan drew his weapon, a sleek energy pistol, and fired. The guards dropped to the ground, incapacitated, but not dead. He didn't want to kill anyone if he didn't have to, but they had no choice. Lyra's eyes were wide with shock, but she didn't scream or panic. She followed Ethan as he led her through the labyrinthine corridors, dodging more guards and finding hidden passages. The fortress seemed to stretch on forever. But Ethan knew they were getting closer to freedom. They reached the outer wall just as reinforcements arrived. The sun was setting, and the sky was painted with hues of orange and red. Ethan's heart raced as he saw the ships waiting in the distance, ready to take them away. He signaled to the ship's pilot to prepare for takeoff. The princess was safe for now, but he wasn't going to stop until they were off this planet. As they boarded the ship, Lyra turned to Ethan, her face softening. "Thank you for saving me. I don't know what I would have done without you." Ethan gave a small smile. "It's my job. I'm just glad I could get you out of there." The ship's engines roared to life as they lifted off the ground, leaving the fortress and the dangers behind. But even as they soared into the sky, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. He had saved the princess, but there was more to come. And he had a feeling that the king, Lyra's father, wasn't going to be pleased with how this rescue unfolded. The ship flew smoothly through the skies of Zorath, heading toward the royal palace. Ethan sat beside Princess Lyra, watching her closely. Her golden hair, which had been a tangled mess from the long captivity, was now neatly tied, as she had been. Quiet for most of the journey, looking out of the window with a distant expression. Ethan, on the other hand, could not stop thinking about the events that had just unfolded. He had never thought a rescue mission would lead to something like this. As the royal palace came into view, the towering structure stood tall against the setting sun. It was magnificent, made of shiny, silver-like metal with intricate designs that spoke of the old royal line. The palace was surrounded by lush gardens and crystal-clear waters, but there was a certain heaviness in the air as they approached. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Once they landed, a group of royal guards came to greet them. They looked at Ethan with a mix of curiosity and respect. Had saved their princess after all. The captain of the guard, a tall, armored man named Varric, nodded in approval as they disembarked from the ship. "Welcome, Princess Lyra. You are safe now," Varric said, his voice firm. Lyra nodded, her face still serious. She turned to Ethan. "Thank you for everything, Ethan. You've done more than I could have ever hoped for." Ethan gave a small smile, but his heart wasn't in it. He wasn't sure what to expect next. What happened after saving the princess? What was the next step? As they walked through the palace halls, Lyra remained silent. She seemed to be lost in thought, her gaze distant. Ethan followed closely behind her, keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. The palace was grand and full of life, with servants and nobles bustling around, but there was an air of tension that was hard to ignore. Finally, they reached the royal chambers, where King Erjar awaited them. The king was an imposing figure, tall and muscular, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. His long silver beard flowed down to his chest, and he wore a crown made of shining jewels. As they entered, the king stood up from his throne and walked toward Lyra, embracing her warmly. "My daughter," King Rhaegar said, his voice full of emotion, "you are safe. I am forever in your debt, Ethan." Ethan nodded, feeling slightly uncomfortable under the king's intense gaze. "It was my duty, your majesty. I was just doing my job." King Rhaegar's gaze softened for a moment before he spoke again. "Your duty, ... yes. But your actions have saved my daughter's life. You have done what no one else could do. For that, you deserve much more than gratitude." Ethan was about to speak when King Rhaegar raised a hand, signaling for silence. "There is an old tradition in my kingdom," the king continued. "A tradition that must be honored when someone saves the life of the royal family. A bond must be formed, a sacred bond between the savior and the saved." Ethan blinked, unsure of what the king meant. "A bond?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion. "Yes," King Rhaegar replied, his voice unwavering. "A bond that binds both parties together for life. This bond is not only symbolic, but also powerful. It strengthens the bond between our people and ensures peace between them. Without it, the saving of my daughter would be incomplete." Ethan's heart began to race. You mean I have to form some kind of alliance with the princess? He asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. King Rhaegar's eyes gleamed. Not just an alliance, a true bond. You will share your life with her as her protector, and she will share hers with you. It will be a partnership, one that benefits both of you and your people. Ethan's mind was spinning. He had never heard of anything like this before. It was just a soldier, a human, who was only doing his job. He'd never expected to be involved in something so personal. Princess Lyra stepped forward then, her face serious but her eyes filled with understanding. What is our tradition? She said softly. The bond is meant to symbolize the unity between our worlds. It is something sacred. The king is right, Ethan. This is the way it has always been. Ethan looked between them, his mind racing. He had never asked for any of this. He'd only wanted to save Lyra, to complete his mission and go home. But now it seemed like his life was being tied to hers in a way he never imagined. I don't understand, he said, his voice heavy with uncertainty. Why me? I'm just a soldier. I'm not like you. The king looked at Ethan with a mix of seriousness and kindness. It is not about who you are, Ethan. It is about what you've done. You have given your life for my daughter. You have proven that you are someone who can be trusted, someone who can protect her. That is what matters. Lyra added, it is also about the future. We must protect our people, Ethan. The galaxy is changing, and we need strong allies. This bond is not just for us. It is for both our worlds. Ethan was silent for a long moment, trying to process everything that was happening. He hadn't signed up for this. He hadn't expected to be involved in intergalactic politics or be asked to form a bond with a princess. He was just a soldier, trying to do what was right. But as he looked at Lyra, standing there with her quiet strength and grace, he realized that this was bigger than himself. This wasn't just about him. It was about something more, something important. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. I need time to think about this, he said, his voice low. King Rhaegar nodded, his expression softening. Of course, but know this, Ethan. The bond must be made soon. The kingdom is in danger, and we cannot wait too long. Ethan nodded slowly. The weight of the king's words hung heavily in the air. As he left the royal chamber, he couldn't help but wonder what this bond would mean for his future and for the future of Lyra's world. The days that followed were filled with silence and tension. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the king's words. A bond was something that felt so foreign to him. A human soldier who had never imagined he'd be a part of an alien world's tradition. It wasn't that he didn't want to protect Lyra. After all, he had already risked his life to save her. But this bond was something different, something deeper. It made him feel trapped, as though his life was no longer entirely his own. He spent his time in the royal palace, trying to keep busy with small tasks. But the weight of the situation was never far from his mind. He could see Lyra often, but they rarely spoke. The princess, though grateful for his rescue, seemed as confused as he was. She had been raised in a world that placed great importance on traditions and duty, and while she had accepted that these traditions were necessary, it was clear she was struggling with what lay ahead. Ethan would catch her glancing at him from across the room, her eyes filled with questions, but she never asked them. He had hoped that by giving her space she would come to her own conclusions. But every time he saw her, that same unease lingered between them. They were both strangers to each other, yet bound by circumstances they didn't fully understand. One evening, after a quiet dinner in the royal dining hall, Lyra approached him. Her steps were slow, but her face was determined. Ethan looked up from his meal, surprised to see her walking towards him with purpose. Ethan, she said softly, sitting across from him. We need to talk. Ethan nodded, putting down his fork. He had been expecting this. I agree, he said. We need to figure this out. Lyra looked at him carefully, her blue eyes searching his face. I don't understand it either, Ethan. This bond, I can't deny the duty I have to my people, but it feels wrong. It feels forced. Ethan leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. I feel the same way, he admitted. I didn't sign up for any of this. I came here to rescue you, not to become part of some royal tradition. Lyra's gaze softened. But my father... He's the king. And this is what is expected. If we don't form this bond, it could tear our kingdom apart. Ethan frowned. So, your people are more important than what we want? He asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Lyra's lips tightened. It's not that simple. One wish it were, but my people. They've always believed in this bond. They believe that the unity between me, and the person who saved my life will bring peace and strength to the kingdom. It's a powerful symbol, a symbol of trust. Ran a hand through his hair. He hadn't realized how much pressure she was under. He had only been focused on his own confusion, but Lyra was in the middle of this tradition, expected to uphold the very things that made her who she was. It was no wonder she seemed so distant. I understand that your people believe in it, he said, his voice calmer now. But what about you? Do you want this bond? Do you even want to be tied to someone like me? Lyra's face flushed slightly, and she looked down at the table, as if searching for the right words. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know if I want it, but I don't know if I have a choice. Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. For her, she was trapped by her duty, just as he felt trapped by his mission. Neither of them had asked for this, yet here they were, caught in the middle of a tradition neither of them understood fully. I didn't ask for this either, Ethan said quietly. I'm a soldier, Lyra. I fight wars, not make bonds with people from other worlds. But here I am. I don't know how to make sense of it. Lyra nodded slowly, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her plate. You're not alone in feeling that way. I've never been asked what I want. It's always been about what's best for the kingdom, what's best for my father's legacy. No one ever asks if I'm happy with any of it. The weight of her words settled between them. Ethan wanted to tell her that he understood, that he could help her find a way out of this. But he knew it wasn't that simple. He wasn't sure he even had the power to change anything. He was just a human soldier, a visitor in a strange world, thrust into a situation he didn't know how to handle. I don't know what to do either, he said finally. But I won't lie to you. Can't just pretend this bond doesn't mean something. It's important, not just to you, but to your people. Whether I like it or not, it's important to me too. Lyra looked at him, her expression softening. You're right, she said quietly. It is important. But that doesn't mean it's easy. They both sat in silence for a while, the weight of their shared understanding settling between them. They were two strangers, caught in the middle of something bigger than either of them. But for the first time since their conversation had begun, there was a flicker of something else in the air. Something spoken. Ethan's thoughts drifted back to the bond the king had mentioned. It wasn't just about duty. It was about the future. Lyra's people had placed their trust in the bond, and perhaps there was a reason for that. Maybe it wasn't just a tradition. Maybe it was a way to ensure the survival of their worlds. He had always believed in protecting others, but this was different. This wasn't about fighting or saving lives. It was about something deeper, more complicated. Lyra looked up at him, her face earnest. I know this isn't what you wanted, Ethan, and I don't know what will happen between us. But I want you to know that I will try my best to make this work, for my people and for you. Ethan met her gaze, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. For the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could make this work. Maybe there was a way forward, even if they didn't understand it yet. I'll try to, he said softly. I'll try to make it work. As the conversation came to a close, both of them felt a little lighter. They were still unsure, still uncertain, but there was a quiet understanding between them now. The bond might still seem impossible, but maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make it their own. The days after their conversation passed slowly. Ethan and Lyra continued their routines in the royal palace, but there was a new quiet understanding between them. They spoke more openly now, though not always about the bond. Instead, they spent time getting to know each other in small ways. Ethan was still uneasy about the idea of a forced connection, but his feelings toward Lyra were changing. She was kind, intelligent, and strong qualities that had first drawn him to respect her during the rescue. For Lyra, things were no different. She had been raised with strict customs and duties, and while she had accepted them for years, the idea of her life being connected to a human in such a permanent way was difficult to accept. Yet over time she began to appreciate Ethan's company. He wasn't like the other nobles and warriors in her court. He didn't speak in circles or hide behind power. He was direct, honest, and, despite his soldier's nature, gentle in ways that caught her off guard. One evening, after a long day of meetings with her father's advisors, Lyra found Ethan in the garden. He was sitting on a stone bench, looking up at the stars. She had noticed how often he would retreat to this quiet space, away from the bustle of palace life. There was something comforting about the garden's calmness, a place where one could think without being watched. Lyra had come to like this space too, though she had not shared it with anyone until now. Ethan turned when he heard her footsteps. He smiled a little, a smile that was softer than usual. "Princess," he said, his voice a little more relaxed than it had been in their earlier conversations. "Is this your spot?" Lyra asked, sitting down beside him. She was careful to keep some space between them, though the garden's calm made her feel at ease. Ethan shrugged, looking up at the sky. "I come here when I need to think," he said. "The stars remind me of home. They're all different, but in some way they're all connected." Lyra followed his gaze, wondering what he saw in the stars. To her, the sky had always felt distant and untouchable. But Ethan spoke of them with such familiarity, as though they were old friends. "I've never been far from Zorith," Lyra admitted, a hint of sadness in her voice. "I've seen other worlds and stories, but that's all I've always had. To stay close, to protect my people." Ethan glanced at her, noticing the change in her tone. There was more to Lyra than the royal title she wore. She wasn't just a princess. She was a person caught between duty and desire, just like anyone else. "Do you ever wish you could leave? See other worlds?" he asked quietly. Lyra turned her gaze to him. "Of course," she replied, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've always wondered what it would be like to live freely, to not have to worry about what's expected of me." Ethan nodded slowly. He understood that. He had lived his life by the rules of being a soldier, doing what was asked of him, without ever thinking about what he truly wanted. But meeting Lyra and now having this conversation with her made him realize how much more there was to life. It wasn't all about following orders and fighting battles. Sometimes it was about finding a connection with another person, even in the strangest of circumstances. "Maybe someday," Ethan said, his voice thoughtful. "Maybe someday we'll both get to see what lies beyond all of this." Lyra smiled. "Faintly, I'd like that." For a long moment, they sat together in silence, the sounds of the palace distant behind them. The air was cool, and the sky was full of stars. It felt like the world was holding its breath, as if everything around them had paused for just a little while. "I've been thinking about what you said," Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. "About the bond?" Ethan turned to look. At her surprised, "What do you mean?" Lyra sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of the stone bench. "I've spent so much time running from it, Ethan, hiding behind my father's decisions and what's expected of me. But I can't keep pretending it doesn't matter. I can't ignore the fact that the bond is important, not just for my people, but for me as well." Ethan listened carefully, sensing the weight of her words. "You don't have to do anything. You don't want to, Lyra? The bond, ... It's your choice. If you don't want it, you don't have to accept it." Lyra looked at him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that surprised him. "It's not that simple," she said softly. "My father made it clear. The bond is more than just a personal choice. It's a symbol of unity for my people. But I don't want to feel forced into something, especially when it feels so... unnatural." Ethan could hear the conflict in her voice, and he could feel her frustration. She wasn't just a princess. She was a person with dreams, fears, and desires of her own. He understood now that the bond wasn't just about him. It was about her too. "I'm not asking you to make a decision now," he said gently. "But you don't have to carry the burden alone." I'm here, Lyra. I'll stand by you, whatever happens. Lyra looked at him, her face softening. The first time, she didn't feel like she was alone in this. She had felt so isolated for so long, trapped by expectations and duties. But in this moment, sitting beside Ethan, she felt a warmth she hadn't known before. "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered. "That means more to me than you know." Ethan gave a small smile, and for a brief moment, everything seemed easier. The weight of the world didn't feel as heavy when they were together. The palace, the kingdom, the royal duties, they all seemed distant now. All that mattered was the quiet connection they shared in the garden, a bond that was beginning to form on its own. It's not forced by tradition, but by mutual respect and understanding. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice firm with quiet confidence. And for the first time, Lyra believed him. The peaceful days that followed seemed too good to be true. Ethan and Lyra had started to find a rhythm in their daily lives. They spent time together more often, walking through the palace gardens or talking late into the night about their hopes and dreams. The bond between them was growing, but so were the pressures. Ethan couldn't ignore the constant feeling that things were bound to change. Lyra had spoken of it before the weight of her duties. She wasn't free, no matter how much she tried. To convince herself otherwise, one evening, as the sun set behind the high towers of the palace, Ethan and Lyra stood on the balcony looking out at the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of purple and orange, and the air was still. They had been speaking for hours, discussing everything from Lyra's childhood memories to Ethan's life on Earth. They were slowly getting to know each other. But neither of them was ready to admit how much the other had come to mean. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Lyra asked, her voice soft but serious. Ethan turned his gaze to her. "What do you mean?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "About the bond, about what we're supposed to be, the future." Ethan thought about it. "For a moment I think about it, yeah. I don't know what to think, Lyra. There's too much at stake. There's your kingdom, your people, and ... And you?" she finished for him, turning to face him. "And you. I know you're thinking about the bond, about how it will affect your life. I've been thinking the same thing. I don't want to be a burden to you. But we don't have a choice, do we?" Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but before he could speak, a sudden noise interrupted their conversation. A loud crash echoed from the lower levels of the palace. The sound of shouting and running footsteps filled the halls, followed by a screech of metal scraping against stone. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her back inside the palace. "Stay here," he ordered firmly. "Don't move until I'm back." Lyra tried to protest, but Ethan was already gone. He sprinted down the corridors, his heart pounding in his chest. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. The palace was under attack. He reached the main hall where chaos had already broken out. Guards and servants were scrambling in all directions, trying to defend themselves from the unexpected assault. But it wasn't just any attack. It was a betrayal. Ethan. Varric, the captain of the royal guard, shouted as he ran toward him. "The traitors, they've turned against the king." Ethan's eyes widened. Traitors. He didn't have time to process the shock. "Where's Lyra? Is she safe?" Varric nodded. "Grimly, she's in her chambers, but they're heading there now. You need to move fast." Without another word, Ethan raced toward Lyra's room. The hallways seemed darker now, filled with shadows that moved in unnatural ways. The sounds. A battle grew louder as he neared her chambers. He burst through the door just in time to see a group of masked figures standing near Lyra, weapons drawn. "Get away from her," Ethan shouted, his voice a growl of fury. The masked figures turned, their eyes cold and calculating. One of them, a tall man with sharp features, stepped forward. "You're too late, soldier," he sneered. "The kingdom is ours now." Ethan didn't hesitate. He pulled out his weapon and fired. The first figure dropped to the ground, and the others scattered, attempting to regroup. But Ethan was faster. His training kicked in, and he took them down one by one. The sound of blaster fire echoed through the palace. Lyra, trembling but unharmed, stood by the window, watching the chaos unfold. Ethan rushed to her side, his eyes scanning her for any injuries. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft despite the tension. Lyra nodded quickly. I'm fine, but the palace. It's falling. Apart. Ethan grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door. Need to get out of here now. They ran through the corridors, the sound of fighting growing distant as they neared the exit. The once peaceful palace was now a battleground, with traitors and loyalists clashing in every corner. But Ethan's only focus was getting Lyra to safety. As they reached the front gates, Ethan paused. There was one more thing he needed to do. He turned to Lyra. I'll stay behind to make sure the rest of the palace is secured. You need to leave now. No, Lyra said quickly, her voice filled with resolve. I won't leave you behind. I'll catch up, Ethan promised. You need to go. The kingdom needs you. Lyra hesitated, but she understood. She kissed him quickly on the cheek and turned to leave. Please come back, she said, her voice trembling. Ethan watched her go, his heart heavy. Couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something much larger than either of them had expected. The traitors had already infiltrated the palace. They could do that. There was no telling how far their reach went. This wasn't just about Lyra anymore. It was about the future of the entire kingdom. He turned back toward the palace and drew his weapon. It was far from over. The battle for Zorath had just begun. The night had fallen over the royal palace, but the darkness felt heavier than usual. The air was thick with tension, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. After the attack by the traitors, the palace was on high, alert, with guards stationed everywhere. Lyra had been taken to a safe room deep within the palace, away from the chaos outside. But Ethan knew that this was only temporary. There were still enemies within, and the palace was far from safe. He paced back and forth in the command room, his mind racing. The traitors had made their move quickly, and it was clear that they had planned this for a long time. They had connections inside the palace, and their intentions were far from peaceful. Lyra's father, King Argar, had been forced into hiding, and the royal family was now vulnerable. Ethan clenched his fists. The decision he had been putting off was no longer something he could avoid. The bond, the choice he had to make, was no longer just about saving Lyra. It was about the future of the entire kingdom. Ethan Varick's voice pulled him from his thoughts. The captain of the royal guard stepped into the room, his face grim. The traitors are regrouping. We need to move fast. Ethan nodded, his mind clear now. What's the plan? Varick glanced at the door behind him. The king has a safe passage out of the palace, but it's not secure. We need to get to him before the traitors do. It's the only way to stop. Ethan's heart pounded. Couldn't leave the palace with Lyra still in danger. I'll go with you. I'll make sure the king is safe. But we have to move quickly. Varick hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I'll get the guards ready. You take the princess and get to the safe passage. I'll meet you there. With that, the two men parted ways, and Ethan made his way to Lyra's room. He had promised her that he would return, and he intended to keep that promise. When he reached the safe room, he found her standing by the window, her face pale with worry. Lyra, he said softly, we need to go. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with fear and determination. What's happening, Ethan? Why is everything falling apart? Ethan took a deep breath. There's a group of traitors within the palace. We need to get to safety now. Your father's alive, but we can't stay here any longer. Lyra's eyes widened in shock. But the bond, the king. He needs me. Ethan moved closer to her, his voice gentle. The bond is important, but right now, your life is more important. We have to escape before it's too late. For a moment, Lyra stood frozen, uncertainty flashing across her face. But then, as if something inside her clicked, she nodded.
You're right.
Let's go. Ethan led her through the corridors, keeping a steady pace as they moved toward the hidden passageway. The palace was eerily quiet, the sounds of battle far away, but still present in the air. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The bond. It was never going to be simple, but the choices he had made since meeting Lyra had only deepened his feelings for her. It wasn't just about duty anymore. He cared for her in a way he hadn't expected. He wasn't sure if it was love, but he knew it was something worth protecting. As they reached the entrance to the safe passage, they were met by Varric and a few loyal guards. "We've secured the path," Varric said, his face grim but determined. "The king is waiting." Ethan nodded and turned to Lyra. "We're almost there. Stay close." They moved through the passage, the walls narrow and winding. The air grew colder, and the only sound was the soft echo of their footsteps. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the exit. The moonlight shone through the cracks in the stone, casting long shadows across the ground. It was a moment of peace, but they knew it wouldn't last. Varric stepped forward. "We'll wait here," he said. "You need to speak with the king." Ethan turned to Lyra. "This is it. King is counting on you." Lyra swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She had spent her whole life preparing for moments like this, but it still felt unreal. "I can't do this alone, Ethan. I need you with me." Ethan's heart tightened. He wanted to stay by her side, but he knew what had to be done. "Be here when it's over, Lyra. Whatever happens." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I trust you." With that, Lyra stepped forward, her back straight, her face determined. Ethan watched her go, his heart heavy with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. He had promised to protect her, and he would do whatever it took. But the decision she had to make the bond was one he couldn't make for her. The air outside was cooler than it had been inside the palace. The stars were bright above them, but the world felt like it was closing in. Lyra stood before her father, King R'ger, who waited patiently at the far side of the camp. He had been watching the chaos unfold from the shadows, and he was clearly relieved to see his daughter safe. "Lyra, the king said softly, his voice a mix of love and authority. "I'm glad you're here." Lyra stood tall. "Father, I know what must be done." King R'ger's eyes softened, but his voice remained steady. "It's not just about you and me, my daughter. It's about the future of the kingdom. That future lies in the bond." Lyra nodded, feeling the weight of her father's words. The bond was more than a tradition. It was the foundation of their kingdom's strength. She had always known this, but now, standing before him, she realized it wasn't just about duty, it was about the future she would choose for herself. "I'll do what I must," she said quietly. Ethan stood back, watching as Lyra made her choice. The bond wasn't just a piece of her duty, it was part of the life she would lead. The choice was hers, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever she decided, he would be by her side.